Președintele comitetului militar al NATO dezvăluie la Antena 3 CNN detaliile contraofensivei pregătite de Ucraina și ne spune ce a aflat Alianța despre planurile lui Putin. Amiralul Bauer, care s-a aflat în vizită în România, ne-a acordat un interviu și în premieră mondială oferă câteva informații extrem de căutate de toate televiziunile din întreaga lume. Faptul că responsabilii militari ai NATO ies foarte rar în public, aproape deloc. Ieri noi am avut acest privilegiu de a-l intervieva pe amiralul Bauer, președintele Comitetului Militar, ne dă posibilitatea să vă oferim niște informații în premieră despre planurile pe care NATO le are pentru România, pentru flancul estic și care sunt informațiile pe care conducerea Alianței Nord-Atlantice le are în legătură cu contraofensiva Ucrainei.
Admiral Bauer, what is the military help that we, the allies, and all the 50 nations are giving to Ukraine to make as successful as possible this counteroffensive that we are waiting to liberate Ukraine's territory?
Yeah, so because the Russian strategic objectives have not been met, none of them actually. And so the Russians will continue to try to achieve those objectives, and therefore Ukraine has to continue to defend itself. And therefore we have to continue to help Ukraine. That's the logic of what we are doing. The Ukrainians want to retake what is rightfully theirs, that is their land, that has been taken illegally by Russia, and therefore they are preparing for a counteroffensive. And I think the Russians will most likely try to continue the offensive actions and try to take more land of Ukraine. And it is a race against the time, because both nations have similar problems in terms of they need more and new personnel, they need more and new weapon systems and ammunition. And both Russia and Ukraine are doing that at the moment. I think Russia will focus not as a choice, but because they have no alternative. They will focus on quantity more than quality. So they most likely will use freshly mobilized, poorly trained troops and old capabilities, like the T-54 tanks they are now taking out of their stocks. Ukraine is getting more and more modern Western weapon systems, and the nations that support Ukraine are investing in training, not only on that particular weapon system, but also in the combination of the use of combined weapons, so-called combined arms operations. So it's tanks with artillery and infantry. And in that sense, the Ukrainian forces will have better equipment and will be better prepared, including the sustainment of those forces, so the ability to repair weapon systems and to have sufficient ammunition for the fight if it starts. The timing of that counteroffensive is for Ukraine to decide.
Chairman Bauer, I heard you saying something very interesting, that this war is a war of the past and also a war of the future. Why do you mention both of these historical times?
Because we see elements of the past, and not the recent past, but of the First World War, basically. So we see trench warfare, we see artillery barrages that remind us of the First World War, 1914, 1918. And we see elements of modern warfare with drones and cyber and artificial intelligence. And that combination means that for a long time people thought that the future wars would only be about these new technologies and not about mud and blood and tanks and soldiers dying. But people thought it was only high-tech, and that's not true. It is a combination. So we are fighting old wars and new wars today at the same time.
What are the perspective of enlargement of NATO presence on the eastern flank and particularly in Romania. What do you have in mind when we are talking about prepositions of troops and technique, and how far we'll see the level of NATO presence in Romania? Now we are at 5,000 troops in Cinque and Cogălnicianu and other places.
It's important to say that NATO consists of 31 sovereign states. So it all starts with the nation asking for the presence of allied troops on its soil. It's not a decision by NATO. It is a request from the nation, and that is then basically brought to NATO, and then other nations consider whether they can and will contribute with troops. That's how it works. And then the result is basically what is the present situation. And the decision in Madrid has been that when it comes to the battle groups, the nations will provide in 8 countries, so the 3 Baltic states, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, 8 battle groups in total, and those battle groups will be enabled battalions. So that is battalions with some air defense and some logistics, etc. And when there is intelligence that there is a danger to the alliance, then there will be a decision to increase the size of the battle groups from a battalion to a brigade. And the nations that are lead nation for those 8 battle groups have promised to organize that increase in the forces. And that will be done when it is necessary, of course. So not permanently, but when it is necessary. And we have agreed that over the coming years we will show that that mechanism works through exercises. So in the coming years you will see in the 8 nations that every year there's a number of battle groups that will be increased to a brigade for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever, to show that everybody is convinced that it works, that the mechanism works. So that is how we have agreed. If the situation changes as a result of the war, then there might be a change in that decision. But that depends on the reality on the ground in Ukraine. And so I will not start to speculate on that, but that is possible, as we have changed it from what it was to what with the 8 battle groups now.
Aș adăuga aici, dacă se poate, în ceea ce ne privește. Pentru că acest sprijin nu este numai în domeniul terestru, este un sprijin multidomeniu. Avem dislocat pe teritoriul României militari francezi care deservesc și instalații de apărare antiaeriană. Avem dislocate avioane din Italia și din Spania. În același timp participăm și noi, tocmai am început misiunea de poliție aeriană în Lituania. În ceea ce privește brigada franceză, battle grupul francez care evoluează spre brigadă și în același timp și brigada americană, pentru că la Mihail Cogălnicianu, divizia 10 Munte, comandamentul tocmai a înlocuit comandamentul diviziei 101 infanterie, avem o brigadă minus dislocată la Mihail Cogălnicianu. O să vedeți elemente din brigada franceză la exercițiul Saber Guardian, care se va desfășura la sfârșitul lunii mai, începutul lunii iunie. Vor fi în total aproximativ 5.000 de militari români și 5.000 de militari străini din aceste battle grupuri și brigăzi. Militarii francezi în acest moment pe teritoriul nostru depășesc cifra de 1.400, militarii americani depășesc cifra de 2.000, în total sunt 4.800 de militari străini pe teritoriul României. În același timp veți vedea și contribuția noastră în alte state și la exerciții. Vom participa la exercițiul Anaconda din Polonia, un exercițiu important pe care aliații noștri îl desfășoară aproape în fiecare an, cu aproximativ 400 de militari, elicoptere, mijloace tehnice și așa mai departe. Deci această participare o dorim cât mai largă, dorim să și acționăm pentru a îndeplini ceea ce am spus la Madrid, este foarte important pentru credibilitatea noastră și este foarte important Unu, să putem susține ce am dislocat aici, iar în ceea ce ne privește să putem asigura sprijinul națiunii gazdă pentru forțele care sunt dislocate.
Vă provoc, please.
If I may add, because it's a very important point that General Petrescu is making, because we all focus very much on the eastern flank now, because of what is happening in Ukraine. But NATO has a responsibility to make sure that the alliance remains safe. And that means that we continue to watch what is happening in the west, on the Atlantic Ocean, in the high north, in the south, in space, in cyber, to make sure that we understand all the threats around us and, if necessary, to respond to that. So the regional plans that are being developed, as I talked about, is not only looking to Russia in the east, so to say, but also from the north, the west, and the south, and from space and from cyber.
So we have a 360 degrees.
It's a 360 degrees in all domains and in all geographic areas.
The problem is, Admiral Bauer, that the Black Sea has become a war theater. And the naval NATO presence in the Black Sea is not enough when we are watching the Russian threat that is growing day by day. They launch missiles from the Black Sea. The Russian fleet is walking, the submarines and all the vessels. And there's been some fights in the Snake Island, very close to the Romanian shores. So what can be done to increase the NATO naval presence in the Black Sea and to increase the Allied security as a, let's say, countermeasure to the Russian threat?
I think it's very important what Turkey did with the Montreux Treaty. So the Turkish government has decided to make sure that there is no reinforcements by Russia through the straits into the Black Sea. So there was one ship that sunk that has not been replaced because the Russians were not allowed to bring in a new frigate or a cruiser to replace the Moskva. And so I think that is an important message for Russia. The second one is that we do and continue to execute air surveillance over the Black Sea in international airspace. And it's been done by NATO through the air-ground surveillance systems that NATO owns, and that's been operated from Italy. And a number of allied nations do that as well. And so we keep an eye on what the Russian activity in the Black Sea is. And of course, we have three allies in the Black Sea, which is Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. And they have their naval activities in the Black Sea. What has not been there for a while now, as a result of the war, is of course the standing NATO maritime groups, or the NATO mine countermeasure groups. Because part of this Montreux Treaty decision is also to not bring in more forces than are already there. And that is a decision that I think for the short term is understandable and is a wise thing to do. But I understand for the longer term that the countries, the NATO members in the Black Sea are concerned about the maritime presence in the longer term. And once it is possible again, I am entirely sure and convinced that we will bring back the maritime naval forces, both the surface ships and the mine countermeasure vessels into the Black Sea to operate there as well. And of course, there's also exercises on land that have an impact on the maritime and as I earlier mentioned, the air activities.
Admiral Bauer, we had a military incident in the Black Sea with a Russian fighter that took down an American drone. And what are the lessons learned from this incident? Because we need to keep watching the Russian aggressive and assertive behavior.
One, I think, is important to state that Russia is not seeking a confrontation on our territory. I think that is important for all the allies to recognize. So this is an unmanned vehicle, so it is not a manned vehicle. That is also important. But of course, it is an unmanned vehicle in this particular case of the United States, and it was operating over international waters and in international airspace. So they were having all the rights to be there and to operate the aircraft there. And therefore the Russian activities and behavior has been irresponsible, it is unsafe, and it is against all the international rules and regulations. And so it is another proof that the Russians do no longer adhere to those international rules. And they try to increase the areas where others are not allowed or hindered to operate over or in the Black Sea, which is actually not the purpose for those rules. So a notice to airmen, for example, is a temporary area in which is the result of, let's say, an exercise by a nation, where you fire guns or where you fire a missile for exercise purposes. And then everybody who is flying there understands that there is a danger, but it is actually still allowed to be there. And therefore it is unprofessional and it is unsafe what the Russians are doing. At the same time, they are not threatening the allies in our territorial waters, on our land or in our skies.